Shall we start? Good morning, everybody. Let me welcome you all to this third session on South-South sharing of policy experiences. The objective of this session this morning is to address various issues related to challenges and policies for structural transformation. The session will be divided in two parts. We are very grateful to Her Excellency Mrs. Khotami Silva to address the meeting and provide the keynote speech. Her intervention will be followed by a panel of high-level international experts from Indonesia, Mozambique, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and China that have prepared research papers or policy briefs for the project. All of these research papers and policy briefs are available from the BRI platform on UNCTAD's website. To set the stage, allow me a few introductory remarks. Regarding challenges and policies for structural transformation, there are long-standing issues like building infrastructure and education, as well as providing long-term finance for investment. More recently, however, there has been mounting evidence suggesting that structural change and building a manufacturing sector has become harder to achieve, and that indeed structural change has mainly occurred from agriculture to services, with manufacturing playing a more subdued role. So I think there are at least three trends in the global economy that may make structural transformation more demanding today. A first issue regards international trade and integration into the global economy. As more and more economies have adopted export-oriented industrialization, it has become more challenging to obtain market shares that are large enough to provide the economies of scale that underlie the building of a manufacturing sector. Moreover, there seems to be underway a change in the global organization of production in the form of shortening international production networks and a potential reshoring of manufacturing activities to advanced economies. At the level of firms, there's likely to be reduced emphasis on efficiency and the sourcing of inputs from the cheapest source. Instead, emphasis may well shift to strengthening the resilience of supply chains by bringing production closer to final demand. At the policy level, there has also been the worry that outsourcing of manufacturing production has played a role in increased inequality and a shrinking middle class in advanced economies. Additional geopolitical issues have played a further role in inducing the global spread of production of items that are just important for national security reasons. A second issue regards automation and potential changes to the global organization of industrial production from that side. Existing predictions on the number of jobs in the global south that are replaceable by robots may be strikingly exaggerated for the short term. Nevertheless, since the adoption of automated production modes is becoming cheaper and cheaper, automation will hit employment opportunities also in low-wage economies at some point in the future. Moreover, the pandemic has shown that automated production is much more resilient than production based on workers. Last but not least, the challenges of climate change imply a need to reduce the environmental footprint of structural transformation and change the emission-intensive modes of manufacturing that are based on fossil fuels. However, the implication is not to forego industrialization for environmental reasons. Rather, the challenge is to find the right policies that will allow for structural transformation while observing planetary environmental boundaries. So overall, I would argue that structural transformation remains of fundamental importance for economic resilience, but also that environmental sustainability and social inclusiveness must become the crucial attributes of manufacturing aimed at achieving the SDGs. It is clear that there is no one policy measure that will allow achieving structural transformation on its own, but there needs to be a plurality of measures. This respects the structure of our session that will feature a range of policy areas. Let me stop here and now turn to our keynote speaker, Her Excellency Mrs. Khotami Silva, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Sri Lanka to the World Trade Organization. She assumed her duties as the first female ambassador and permanent representative of Sri Lanka to the World Trade Organization on 1st April 2019, but even prior to her duties in Geneva, she has played an instrumental role in shaping Sri Lanka's trade policy at the bilateral, regional and multilateral levels, including through previous foreign assignments in India, Switzerland, Australia, Italy, Belgium, and the United Kingdom. So, Ambassador Silva, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Maya, and good morning, everyone. Distinguished speakers and panelists in the podium, distinguished ambassadors and delegates, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, let me place on record my sincere appreciation to Madam Rebecca Grunspan, the Secretary General of UNCTAD, and her able and dynamic team at the Secretariat. In particular, Mr. Richard Kozel-Wright, Director of the Division for Globalization and Development Strategies, and Dr. Rashmi Banga and his deputy, for the invitation extended to the permanent mission of Sri Lanka to the UN and WTO to deliver a keynote address at this session organized under the ambit of the UNCTAD project on South-South integration and the Sustainable Development Goals, under the ambit of enhancing structural transformation in key partner countries on the Belt and Road Initiative. I also wish to thank my colleague, Ambassador C.A. Chandraprema, for according me this opportunity on behalf of both permanent missions. As a participant of the inception meeting of UNCTAD's project on South-South integration and the Sustainable Development Goals, that was held in Jakarta, Indonesia in November 2019, I'm happy to be here also today to address the end of the project meeting. As it is well known, the UNCTAD project aims at drawing policy lessons from the Chinese economic rise and tailoring this lesson to local conditions and ideologistic challenges of developing economies, participating to the BRI, and to foster peer-to-peer learning and sharing of experiences among these economies. Accordingly, Sri Lanka has been one of the pilot countries of this project and benefited from the sharing of policy experiences that has been the focus of the project. Both the written research outputs that the project has provided and the various seminars, webinars, and bilateral exchanges that have taken place over these 3.5 years have been of valuable support to our policymakers. As you know, structural transformation and the shift of economic activities from agriculture to manufacturing and services has been a defining characteristic of successful economic development. Mr. Maya also alluded to this point today in very elaborated manner. The successful developers in East Asia have mainly experienced an expansion of the manufacturing sector, whereas in many economies in South Asia, including Sri Lanka, the declining importance of the agriculture has been accompanied by the services sector, assuming increasing importance both as a source of economic growth and employment. Structural transformation is also affected by both national policies and external economic environment. Now, if you consider the general economic situation in Sri Lanka that provides the frame for the country's policies on structural transformation, Sri Lanka faces a large private saving investment gap, large fiscal deficits due to low tax revenues, declining public investment, and insufficient private sector investment, the latter partly reflecting low credit availability from the banking sector. On the external sector front, the country has had large trade deficits and foreign exchange earnings, such as tourism and workers' remittances, were not large enough even prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. This is partly due to the unprecedented impact, economic and social impact that created by this terrorist attack in April 2019. And to compensate for this deficit or to help over other deficit items of the current account. Sri Lanka thus faces both fiscal and foreign exchange constraints. The result is a large public debt, both domestic and foreign. In terms of the external economic environment, both the COVID-19 pandemic and increased geopolitical tensions may have changed policymakers' perceptions regarding the challenges of opportunities of globalization. But it would be a mistake to turn away from economic integration and multilateralism. Sri Lanka is a country which intends to preserve the multilateral character, particularly in the trade negotiations. Now, the multilateralism in particular has been the enabler of ensuring a common forum for negotiations, and its rule-based system is universally applied on all actors in a fair and non-discriminatory manner, while according special and differential treatment to developing countries and least developed countries. Under the most known multilateral trade institution, which is the WTO, each member has an equal say in the drawing up of new rules and guidelines, and the decisions are made by consensus. The common goal is the dismantling of obstacles to trade to foster prosperity worldwide and promote economic development. The emphasis on these objectives, noble objectives, are needed more than ever due to the unprecedented economic and social challenges the developing countries, particularly small economies such as Sri Lanka, have been facing since the emergence of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. Mr. Maya also alluded to the climate change and digital economy. I think Sri Lanka is also considering that they are posing new challenges for structural transformation, and there is a debate as to whether we should create multilateral frameworks through agreements at the WTO in these areas. One example is the Joint Statement Initiative on e-commerce, where leading digitalized developed countries aspire at binding commitments through digital rules. At a time when many developing countries, and even including Sri Lanka, are still in the process of designing national policies to build their digital infrastructure to bridge the digital divide. There is a risk that the establishment of such rules curtail existing policy and regulatory space that developing countries need to advance structural transformation in the current global economy. In addition, there are also substantial revenue implications, both in terms of the custom duties and the internal taxes that have not been assessed fully to gauge whether benefits of digitalization outweigh the such revenue losses. In conclusion, I wish to commend the UNCTAD Secretariat for its valuable work under this project and congratulate all the panelists for their valuable contributions in making this event a great success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for this intervention and also for pointing to the importance of the external economic environment for structural transformation, that it's not all domestic policies, but that the external environment is very important. And as you rightly point out, I think there's an issue about multilateralism that has to be strong, but at the same time, in the digital area, whether this is the right time for having binding multilateral rules is entirely a different issue. So let me now turn to the second part of our event, the panel discussion followed by questions and answers. We are lucky to have 4 of our 5 panelists present in person. They will speak first, followed by our panelist from China, who is joining us via video link. There's a slight change in the program in that we have an additional speaker who was unable to attend the meeting yesterday. Now, our first panelist is Mr. Tauhid Ahmad, who is the Executive Director of INDEF in Jakarta. You have the floor, Tauhid.
Thank you, Jock, with the opportunity to me, Rasmi, and also Pepe, Dawe, and all colleagues in UNCTAD and all participants. Thank you for giving us opportunity to present our idea or our comment about the Chinese lesson learned, what we can learn until now. In Indonesia, I think it's the same problem with the transformative change that we decrease in our agricultural sector on GDP, then followed by increasing in services. I think it's more. I think this is one condition not only in Indonesia but in developing country is very, very, very often. But the problem is the labor who work in agriculture, industry, and services is become not clearly good, because from the agricultural sector we have more have weakness because GDP per capita less than the services sector. So I think this is a problem. How we can transfer ourselves, become a great economy or become faster than other country. Why this is so problem? Because Indonesia got supported by labor productivity, then financial or then capital or the total factor productivity. That's why in long term we have problem. We cannot follow the good transformation if the source of the growth is very, very not, or can imagine how we can follow, how can we can go faster with other countries, because the problem is the source of growth very, very, very weak. Maybe we have different with other countries, but I think we have to tackle this issue until in the medium and long term. So why we have to listen from Chinese experience? Structural transformation is needed to maintain stable economic growth, but how? So I want to learn about I want to talk about how macroeconomics that on the paper developing countries should maintain a flexible macroeconomic framework. This lesson proves that there is no standard formula in which the flexible of the macroeconomics framework plays a very important role in maintaining macroeconomic stability. Lesson learned in many countries when the economic situation was during the pandemic, including Indonesia, the general strategy is the lower central bank interest rate. However, this cannot follow by reduction in loan and credit interest rates by bank. The process is gradual and still doesn't help much, considering that many banks have excess liquidity due to the relatively increased risk of non-performing loans. Expansive fiscal policy turned out to be without coordination with more flexibility monetary policy. It will be difficult to achieve this target objective, especially high economic growth and low inflation. Lessons learned from China show that the flexible macroeconomic framework will depend on the extent to which the fiscal monetary authorities are in strong coordinations. This only works when the independence of the central bank can be conditioned according to the needs of fiscal policy. The threat of high inflation during the period of economic recovery must in fact be accompanied by rising interest rate. This risk of possible slowdown in economic growth is difficult to avoid. China in this space is clearly experiencing almost the same situation where economic growth is relatively slowing toward the last phase. About the public investment, currently the best lesson that public investments in indeed way to ensure sustainable growth in case of Indonesia, which has a large area, the lie in infrastructure development that only accumulate in one region has resulted in development gaps and inequality in accessibility to education and health services. Transportation infrastructure plays a very important role, just like China, which reach all regions by toll roads and train. Not only population mobility, but also goods and services. In area with a fairly wide marine area category, it seems that it will produce a different approach. Land area with large population are likely to be much more developed than other regions. Not to mention expensive logistic costs between island make infrastructure a must. The problem is that there are different views on how to develop infrastructure in the archipelago, considering that the principle of ship follow the trade will make development gap between regions increasingly difficult to reduce. About the financial institution can play a key role in accelerating growth, I agree that financial institutions not only play a role in encouraging the real sector to work out, but also keep financial system stable. However, this role seems to be a big challenge when the role of credit is still dominated by consumption rather than working capital and investment. The role of financial institutions in providing different interest rates will greatly help the business work. The lesson from China is how to encourage fairly large credit allocation, especially SMEs player, considering that administrative and other costs still make financial institutions reluctant to increase financial access to SMEs. The role of financial sector to finance infrastructure is very important too. However, this can happen through government encouragement through assignment, particularly through state-owned banks. Without slightly forced policy, it seems that the proposed business is still going on. I think China has an advantage with the existence of China Development Bank, which focus on its responsible for raising funds for large-scale infrastructure projects. Banks like this really need to develop with government support, both as state-owned enterprise and public bank that can also be owned by the community. The risk that occurs is the very large debt when the infrastructure that its financial economy is very visible but non-visibly financially visible. For example, development of toll road infrastructure in new area in the first 10 years still needs support of this institution. But at the point, if there is no significant economic development, financial difficulty will also occur. Therefore, the important lesson is that it cannot be separate that infrastructure development must be related to the development of regional economic sector in the area. About the industrialization process really need the government, both supporting infrastructure support such as road access, industrial estate development, and free trade zone to the construction of international port. I see that the government role is also very important so that foreign direct investment is bigger, not only providing tax facilities such as tax allowance, tax holiday, but also supporting facility for exemption and relief from import duties for imported goods, standardizing goods, and providing one-stop service. I think China can do this better. However, the government's role in obtaining land for industrial locations that are affordable is also very important, considering that the biggest cost for investment in the industrial sector is generally quite expensive land price. I think China has advantage over land tenure designed for industry. One of the lessons learned from FDI in China is political stability and security. This can be seen in China and may be different in other countries, with a system of centralized power that is strong enough to provide convenience for foreign investors. This stability is supported by law and regulation that provide more flexibility for investors to develop. In my opinion, these two things also to be studied more deeply, even though the characteristics of political system are different for other developing countries. About technological upgrading, what China has done is basically worthy of being an example, but the critical point is how then local community can also benefit from technological adoption side. One of the policies is to use local material from domestic is indeed the initial key so that local communities can develop more. At this point, the government's role is very important in providing technical assistance, including funding support that local community can continue to grow. The key instead is also the development of human resources in technological upgrading. Not only formal education, but also non-formal education also plays important role. The technological upgrading is very important. If you look at the process, China's R&D budget in last 20 years has grown more than Japan and the United States. This is what I think the advantage of China compared to developing country is political budgeting and encourages faster technological development. Indonesia itself has just started by making institutional changes that were spread across many institutions and then become one institution. Although many doubt whether this will be effective or not, considering that in China, the unification of research institutions themselves is not strategic priority. About debt sustainability, well-targeted investment projects can be financed if they have good plan. However, explained in many developing countries, this can happen in bilateral and multilateral funding scheme. The challenge is the source of funding that is in bond, which tend to be difficult to direct to infrastructure. I think China has a different strategy with bond in infrastructure, which are likely to be more developed than other countries. I see this is important too about the local government, development bank, and commercial institutions work together to finance development projects. This collaboration, however, this can only be done with local government that have fairly good fiscal capacity supported by the financial capacity of regional development bank. The case in Indonesia, this only occurs in sufficiency rich local government, and on the contrary, it rarely occurs in regions with low fiscal capacity. On the other hand, commercial institutions still need financial support, including guarantee from the central government. This guarantee, if what often makes it difficult for infrastructure projects to get funding, considering that risks involved in some infrastructure projects are quite large. Cooperation between local government, development bank, and commercial institutions has indeed become an interesting lesson in China. However, initiatives still came from the central government, and intervention still needed. This happened because the scale of the project being financed is very large. And on the other hand, in small, medium-scale infrastructure, development bank and commercial institutions are not very interested, considering that they are not very profitable financially. Of course, finding a flexible work scheme in finance need to be regulated more deeply. I think what needs to be learned with the funding model for local government in China is local bonds, so the local government have higher fiscal space. However, the challenge is to what extent politically the regional level support, considering that the regional parliament does not want any debt to the next government, considering that the bond will take at least 10 years. Another thing that is quite complicated is debt rating of four regions, which turn out to be only high fiscal region that meet the requirement.
Excuse me,
yes.
I'm afraid I have to ask you to wind up.
Is it possible?
A minute.
Okay.
Perhaps, but
give me 2 minutes. About the, I think I have to closing about the domestic debt will depend on the deepening of financial sector. There are still many residents who have categories as excluded population groups who have difficult accessing financial service. Meanwhile, dependence on bank is also very high. In addition, the domestic financial markets still limited are reflected in several market deepening indicators such as transaction to GDP, trade flow, product variation, instrument and player, as well as price reference elevated financial market infrastructure. My closing, I think several macroeconomic matters need to be determined by deepening of flexible macro strategy by taking into account changing domestic and international pressure, but not letting go to the letting go of the macroeconomic target that have been set, particularly sustainable economic growth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tahid,
Yes.
for sharing this experience with about Indonesia, and also for pointing to the close links between the real and the financial sector, and that it's very important to have long-term finance for investment in the real sector. So let's now move to our second panelist, who is Dr. Mateusz Matusi, who is the National Director of Support for Private Sector Development at the Ministry of Industry and Trade in Mozambique. You have the floor.
Inviting me to be in this meeting. And secondly, I would like to anticipate my apologize, because as you may know, I'm from Mozambique and our official language is Portuguese. So I have to speak on English, and probably I will not be sufficient to talk as I could talk in Portuguese, but I hope you will understand me. So the structure of the presentation, I have some brief introduction. I will talk about the industrial policy after our independence, and I will talk about the policy measure and impact on structural transformation. And lastly, I will talk about the national program to industrialize Mozambique, called PRONAI. The government of Mozambique gives huge importance to the manufacturing industry. This we can see in some of the policy and strategy documents, where it says that in addition to agriculture and fishery, industry is indicated as any engine of the economy with high potential for the generation of new jobs, but also in the 5-year programs of the government, it says as engine for the structural transformation of the national economy, contributing to its qualitative change and improvement of its competitiveness with a view to its insertion in the regional and global markets. Also, we have the National Development Strategy, where it says that the achievement of integrated economy and social development involve the structural transformation of the economy to a competitive and diversified stage, thus betting on industrialization as the main way to achieve the vision of prosperity and competitiveness based on an inclusive and sustainable growth model, ensuring that natural assets continue to offer the environmental resource and service on which the well-being and continuous progress of the country depends. In terms of industrial policy post-independence of Mozambique, we are almost 46 years of independence, and all over these years, the manufacturing industry has been recognized in various ways, such as engine, such driving force, determining factor, dynamizer in the structural transformation and development of economy, which leads with several programs, policy and strategy I will mention some of these policies and strategy during these 46 years. We had in 1977 the economic program of manufacturing industry, and then we had the prospective indicative plan in 1981, and after that we have three industrial policy and strategy. We call it PAY. One in 1997, and then in 2007, and the last one in 2006. And then last year we had a program called PRONAI, National Program to Industrialize Mozambique. For all those policies and strategy, we saw some similarity in terms of objectives, priorities, and pillars. They mention all the same objectives, priority, and pillars. Another observation is that all those development, all those policies, they were a mixed model of industrial policy, the vertical and the horizontal. The most recent policy, the last one, the focus was on simplifying procedures and improving the business environment, thus culminating in the establishment of a consistent public-private dialogue mechanism where the government and the private sector discuss matters from the provincial level till the high level. We held the president at the annual private sector conference. This year we'll have one at the end of this month. In terms of the industrial policy measures and impact on structural transformation, I will start from the industrial policy from 1997, and I underline one of the measures. It was the promotion of the foreign investment with the tax incentives and some electricity tariff reduced. So the result is that we had a mega project. This is the largest industry in Mozambique. We call Mozal. It's aluminum smelt. This leads to the secondary sector. I'm talking about mining, transformation, electricity, and construction, to continuously increase to 25% of GDP in 2004. Also, we saw several projects in the extractive, mining, and processing sector, which lead to export of goods and service in Mozambique registered a strong recovery in net terms. The following industrial policy and strategy, 2007, we underline the establishment of a specific institution to promote the small and medium enterprise. Also, the promotion of various industrial development zones, simplification of procedures and legislation, and the institutionalization of the one-stop shop. As a result, they were entering into operation a large and medium-sized industry in the brewing, edible oil refining, grain milling, cement, and plastic products. Also, the manufacturing industry had been the second sector that most contributed to GDP. So along 10 years, they were share, it was 13.5% above the agriculture, that it was the first with 23.3%. The industrial strategy for 2016 we underline as a measure the revision of the custom tariff. So for that, we have some surcharges on aluminum, cement, and there were reduction of custom duties in the graphic sector. Also, we had the revision of the excise tax code, where the reduction of excise tax for beer that were produced from the local raw materials, cereals and tubercles. This stimulates the increase in industrial production, enhance production through the use of national raw materials, and increase employment. We also had, as a result, we had the gradual application of excise tax to new brew investment. As the result, we stimulate the implementation of 2 large beer industries. We had the 2 large beer industries. One of them is Heineken, and Being Invest that they invested in a small rural area, some 40 kilometers from Maputo. And what we saw, it's a development of this district. We saw also the linkage with for those large industries with the small and medium companies, and it was the result of this introduction of excise tax to new investment in beer. Last year, in August, we launched the national program to industrialize Mozambique. We call PRONAI. This PRONAI, it was inspired by the Industrial Policy and Strategy 2016 and the government 5 years plan and the national strategy development. So the PRONAI aims at contributing to the increase of national industrial production in favor of the use of local raw materials, stimulating production, commercialization, and contributing to rural transformation and generating employment and income, in particular for young people and women. This PRONAI, it's a government initiative to be implemented in partnership with the private sector, following the International Fund Management Standard. Now we are in process. We launched a tender to choose the company that will be in PP model with the government. Also, PRONAI proposed a mixed industrial development model, industrialization based on import substitution, technological industrialization and innovation, resource-based industrialization, and export-based industrialization. In terms of intervention, proposed the infrastructure development, improvement of the business environment, enhancement of local content, and capacity building for the public and private sector. And it's all that I wanted to share with you, and obrigado, and thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Matusi, for sharing this experience of Mozambique. I think Mozambique is an interesting case also because it's basically a mineral-based economy, or it's based on extractive industries. And as we learned from the intervention of the South African expert yesterday, these economies based on extractive industry face an additional challenge with regard to structural transformation. But without further ado, let's now move to our next panelist, who is Hatamika Nanayakada, who is the Deputy President of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. He has over 29 years of experience in the central bank especially in the areas of supervision and regulation of banks, foreign reserves management and international operations, implementation of monetary policy in related domestic operations, macroprudential surveillance, regional development, and public debt management. And I believe that on this last issue, you will focus his presentation. So thank you very much for being with us. You have the floor, D'Amico.
Thank you. Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I'm given 8 minutes, and I'm going to talk a huge issue. Let me see how best I can manage the time. I will skip this. Then the question as to why central bank comes into the picture of debt management. We have a statutory responsibility in managing the country's debts. And then the country's, I think most of the issues that the country is faced with are very much related to the huge debt stock, basically due to issues, some backlogs, some, issues coming from the history. The country is at a critical juncture right now. Sri Lanka has had episodes of very high debt levels. Actually, Sri Lanka has been the darling of donors until it became the it graduated to the low middle income level, and successive governments had been, very, generous spending this money, came almost free, and less, rates, sometimes less than 0.5% service charge. But when the country was graduated to a low middle income country, our access to what you call the concessional funding became very restrictive. And then yet the governments, I know, I mean, you agree with me, this is the experience of all of us, especially the countries from my region, the governments from my region are very much looking forward to their next election. And then their budgets are very much, focused towards, pleasing the voters, and then they want to make sure that they get the second term as well. And there is no any consolidation as far as the fiscal side is concerned. And there are always a lot of spending, sometimes without proper assessment of return, and waste of money. And this has resulted in waste of a lot of resources without having proper generation of revenue for the repayment of these loans. And with the limited access to what you call the concessional financing, then we looked for commercial borrowing. When you look for commercial borrowing, you are exposed to the rating agencies. And then also you are subject to a lot of covenants, and then these creditors basically look for improvements in spending with some meaningful spending. And I think I'll skip this side as well. Now, the issue is the new government, which came to power in 2019, took a decision that it will not go to the commercial market for repayment of maturing debt. Of course, at the time of coming to the power, the government didn't foresee any downside risks relating to COVID. And I mean, you can see here, since the COVID pandemic, the government spending, started going at a rate, but the income was not forthcoming, and the gap, the government, the deficit, fiscal gap was increasing at a rate, but there's no intention of going to the market, and the government also said we will not have any, link with the IMF, because the investors were looking for, rating agencies were looking for a credible anchor. Yet the government's decision was to, finance as much as possible from the domestic market, and then bring down the the what you call the foreign currency component, which was about 56% at the time of coming to the power, to a manageable level of about 1/3. And I mean, we can see you can see improvements there. We have been able to achieve or rather convert some of the foreign currency denominated debt into local currency. But the issue that we are faced with is the domestic resource availability, and this, together with the substantial amount of spending needed by the government for fighting the COVID, created huge, monetizing of the government financing requirement, making the public sector to be competed with the government, the public sector for financing their requirements. And when it comes to ISB, I think the noise we hear from the market is very much related to about 1/10 of the debt portfolio, which is the ISB international sovereign bonds. So we have about 12.5 billion, and then this year we are going to pay, we paid $500 million, and then another 1 billion is due in July. I think the issue is the rating agencies and everyone, investors, are looking at the ability of the government to repay this 1 billion. And, I mean, the 1 billion to be paid in this year is of 1/6 of the total debt repayment. But our exposures to our, multilateral agencies and like ADB, World Bank, then our donor community, our development partners like Japan, China, they don't make any noise. And they think that this is doable. And then also we are comfortable. We think that we can manage this. But because of the noise that is coming from the commercial debt market, I think investors are reluctant to take any position and then bring in new money into the government instruments. Now, having this issues in hand, now what the policy measures that we are looking at, we basically want to see that our short-term debt component is going to be reduced to a greater level, and also increase the, as I mentioned earlier, we had to pump in a lot of money into the market with the development of COVID. The central bank had pumped in about, I think about 600 billion of new money into the system in order to have the government spending rolled out. This has created some additional issues, and then we are planning to, pull back about 500 billion this year. That will help us in containing the escalating inflation also. I think all this will depend on our ability to convince the investors and also improve the domestic debt market conditions. Sri Lanka, of course, doesn't have a very developed domestic debt market yet. There are steps taken to enhance the domestic debt market and its ability to finance the pressure coming from the conversion of foreign currency debt into domestic debts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Damika, for this very interesting presentation. I'm sorry that we only have 10 minutes for that, and I hope that we will be able to address further issues in this area in the question and answer session, because I think what you raise about this issue of fiscal space and monetary expansion in reaction to the pandemic certainly is not only an experience that Sri Lanka is making, but it's true for all of the developing economies, and that in a context of high outstanding debt. And I think the policy measures that you hinted at are extremely useful lessons also for the other economies, and I think it would be worth having an entire session to that, but unfortunately we don't have the time. So let's now move to our next panelist, who is Dr. Safdar Sohail, who is the Dean of the National Institute of Public Policy and a member of the Prime Minister's Task Force on IT in Pakistan. After over 35 years of public service, Mr. Sohail has recently retired from his civil service functions in Pakistan, but I'm sure that with his long experience, he has lots of interesting insights to share with us. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I must start by thanking the project management to not only have me today here, but involve me as an observer in this project right from the beginning, and particularly thank Richard and Dr. Banga for that. The reason that I'm around is that I have been dealing with China-Pakistan Economic Corridor since 2015, and was the lead negotiator from Pakistan side for the long-term plan of China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And I was also at one time, rather I was the first convener from Pakistan side of the joint working groups of industrial cooperation between the two countries. So my perspective, which I'm going to share today, is somewhat different than the other presentations in the sense that the main thrust of the project has been to better understand Chinese structural transformation, and then vis-a-vis those insights and lessons, understand respective countries' structural problems and how one can learn from that. And that, for me personally, has been an extremely interesting learning experience too. But I would say that for me, this has been, I call it a kind of vicarious learning that China has come over its structural problems and transformed successfully. So we are looking at China and trying to know how has it happened, and a lot of useful material has been created out of these experiences. In case of China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, we are at a stage which one could say is the next stage, where China actually designed with Pakistan a very comprehensive, multifaceted collaboration program to help Pakistan get out of its structural problems in the short as well as long term. So this is a partnership on the move with the same objective of using the Chinese experience of structural transformation, sharing that experience with Pakistan, and then undertaking collective efforts to move forward. So in that context, when you look at the phraseology and the terms being used, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor in itself is important. That one of the key elements of this partnership was to create new economic geographies between the two countries. And we have, if we look at the foundational documents of China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, one comes across the objectives of industrialization of Pakistan, cross-frontier cooperation, transit element is also there. So sharing the experience of Chinese spatial development with Pakistan, but sharing with support. And Chinese put three things on the table right from the beginning. One was their financing, the second was their project implementation capacity, and third, their own model and experience. So it was that starting point with which we started in 2013, and there one could briefly talk about the challenge that Pakistan was facing in 2013, and here I have used Dave's presentation of yesterday to highlight the similarity, one can say, of the problems which China faced in 1978 and we were facing in 2018. Low level of exports, huge trade deficit, low-tech commodity-based exports, low yield agriculture, energy problems, macroeconomic volatility. So we had that mix in 2013, to which Chinese responded and took lead in planning the whole China-Pakistan economic corridor. And there, both countries came up with a design of the response, one would say, which was three-dimensional response. And one dimension or leg was an immediate intervention to address the short-term structural problems. And there, energy was one of the major problems that we had. In 2013, we were having long spells of load shedding. So energy was given high attention. Then connectivity was given high attention through Gwadar port. So we had this, what we call early harvest project. So that was one leg. The second pillar of this three-dimensional process was to produce capacity in Pakistan in the long term to achieve the third pillar, which was the structural transformation, that once Pakistan has the capacity, then our manufacturing would be modernized, our agriculture would be modernized, and by 2030, Pakistan would have come over its sticky structural problems, and one would be able to see Pakistan becoming an economic partner, starting from the strategic geostrategic partnership. One can say Pakistan and China, as we all know, have been very close, and one of the objectives was to transform this strategic partnership into an economic partnership. So the objective of elevating your partner by helping it modernize was the key element in this design of the whole project. And there, the key focus was to help Pakistan develop under a unified framework of urban and industrial development. And that was the main focus. And there, in that context, the planning involved development of corridors with a view to have new growth centers and integrate relatively less developed areas of Pakistan with Pakistan's economy in the first place, and then with China in the second place. So in this context now, speaking in 2020, the early harvest projects, most of them completed in 2018, and Pakistan did succeed in coming over the problems of energy load shedding that we had. And then from early harvest projects, we started the long-term plan for effecting that structural transformation that we are talking about. So here I would take a few minutes to share with you the institutional infrastructure that has been put in place by both the countries, which seeks to address comprehensively the major challenges that Pakistan economy is facing. So the current edifice, both countries have the highest level, which is the Joint Coordination Committee, which is headed by the ministers on both sides, ministers of planning. On the Chinese side, this is the NDRC, which is in the lead, and on Pakistan side, this is the Federal Ministry of Planning, which is in the lead. And below that Joint Coordination Committee, which is a rather political level, we have joint working groups represented by both the governments, which take care of the subject which is allocated to them. And there we at present have 11 joint working groups, and those 11 joint working groups could be divided into 4 categories, and that having a look at those categories is interesting in the sense that it has been designed in such a way that one pillar, you can say, or one category is those of enablers. Now here we have the joint working group on connectivity, which takes care of the corridors, new roads. Gwadar is the second joint working group, and the connectivity with the rest of the country. Energy is also there, and then we have a joint working group on ICT. And we have been talking a lot about the importance of ICT. So in this mix, ICT as an enabler is part of that, that category where we have 4 joint working groups. And then we have the joint working groups which seek to create the supporting capacity development. So in the capacity development side, we have a joint working group on science and technology, on ICT again, and then we have a joint working group with an allocation of $1 billion for socioeconomic development to create capacity of socioeconomic development through carefully chosen projects in the country. And that also, this funding also helps integrate relatively less developed areas of Pakistan to have a better quality development, as we say. And at the heart of it are the key sectors which have been chosen for investment. And here we have industrial cooperation, agricultural cooperation, and the services cooperation. And out of services, the sectors which have been chosen are tourism and ICT again. So in these 3 joint working groups, now we have SCZs, we have agricultural modernization project. For example, in case of agriculture, the objective is to come over the structural problems in the agricultural sector. So structural transformation is a bigger umbrella term, but at the sectoral level, there are structural problems, like we have talked and heard a lot about the structural problems in manufacturing, for example, low tech products, in competitive products. So in agriculture, we seek to modernize our agriculture, to go for a better quality agro-processing, and to have better linkage between on-farm and off-farm, and to address the key problem of the low yield that Pakistan has. Likewise in tourism and ICT also. And the 4th one, which is the all-encompassing, one can say, is the institutional support. So we have a joint working group on the long-term planning, which provides the anchor to all the activity which is there. We have a joint working group on security also, because given the on-ground strategic situation, there have been issues of security to the Chinese who are there to help Pakistan implement the project. And then we have another joint working group on international cooperation, which is managed by the Ministries of Foreign Affairs of both the countries. So now this 4-pillar edifice is responsible for helping Pakistan effect the structural transformation up to 2030. And we hope that by the end of 2030, our trade deficit would be less. Both the countries would be integrated much better in terms of the emergence of regional supply chains. The less developed areas of Pakistan closer to Gwadar would have been developed more, and Pakistan would have been industrialized in a more balanced way with a better balance between manufacturing, industry, and services sector. So in this context, with the last thought that I would like to share with you is that talking about structural transformation in any third world country is a very ambitious talk. We have sticky problems. We have been sharing and listening to these problems. So it would require very demanding work and conditions to be there to make a real progress. So in that context, the Chinese call China-Pakistan Economic Corridor as a flagship of Belt and Road Initiative, and both countries are very conscious that this project needs to succeed to become a template or a model of successful structural transformation over a 15 years time. So in that is the context, and I personally think that it would be extremely interesting to watch the way this is handled and how this China-Pakistan Economic Corridor then links up with the economy in Pakistan in general, And in the years to come, how do we succeed in integrating Pakistan with China? Because all said and done, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is a project of trade and investment integration between China and Pakistan. So how would Pakistan be able to benefit from the development of China in such a way that we can see a kind of convergence between the incomes of the two countries, which is the ultimate outcome or objective of any bilateral trade and investment cooperation program. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing this hands-on experience, if I may say. I think this is extremely useful. Also, it indicates what Chinese authorities themselves think that other countries may learn from their experience, how their experience may be implemented elsewhere. So I think this is extremely interesting. Now let's go to our last panelist who joins us via video link. Professor Zhang Jianping is the director of the Center for Regional Economic Cooperation in China. Among many other functions, he is also the vice president of the China Research Association of Social and Economic Systems and a professor of economics at Beijing University. So you have the screen, Professor Zhang.
Okay, thank you. It's my great pleasure to join the meeting. Indeed, our topic is quite complicated and systematically. So due to quite limited time, I just make a few points on that. So first point I like to emphasize on today, actually, China has already become one of the major players of global value chain after accession to the WTO. In recent 20 years, actually, China's manufacturing sectors already occupied more than 30% of the world's total at present. Meanwhile, China has become the largest merchandise trade scale. China's market share in a global market last year close to 15%. Meanwhile, China's bilateral trade and investment relations with other manufacturing powers such as the US, EU, Japan, and South Korea becomes closer and closer. Of course, China has gradually grown into the largest supplier of intermediate goods in the world. I think that that's a phenomenon. But behind that, in the past 40 years, China's market economy is very young. I think that before China's reform and opening up, domestically, China has quite comprehensive industrial system. And after opening up to the world, so a lot of foreign-funded enterprises entered China's market. Of course, from Chinese side, we very appreciate two things. One thing is that infrastructure improvement. The second thing is industrialization. In China, we have a very famous 5 years plan. Actually, from a local level to central level, from department level to central level. That 5-year plan can make China's industrial policy can last for many years, and we can focus on our objectives. Today, if you look at United Nations statistics, actually China's industrial system includes 39 industrial categories, and meanwhile we have 191 medium-sized and more than 500 sub-categories according to the United Nations categorization. I think that's a very unique phenomenon in a global economy. Also, you cannot find the second country like China's situation. Of course, I think that today, China domestic industrial system combined with international foreign-funded enterprises industrial system already becomes a very strong support for China's economy. I think that in the past 40 years, China's industrial park policies has played a very important role. Nowadays, we are very happy to see for example, in African countries, in Ethiopia, and in other countries, in some of ASEAN countries, many of them learn China's experiences and set up their industrial park to make industrial, clustering effect, as well as, marginal costs would be, reduced very rapidly, and then becomes more and more competitiveness in global market. For China's economy, actually, we have very important experiences. That is by opening up, by promoting global globalization and regional economic integration, and China's economy can make very important driving force. If you look at a very typical case, that is Apple products in China, because in the past, actually, in process of globalization, that a very famous vertical specialization has been promoted rapidly due to our technology advancement and telecommunication conditions improvement. For China today, actually, more than half of Apple factories located in China. In global, there are more than 700 factories. In China, more than 350 factories located in China. In China, actually, I think that before 2000, China's international trade model belonging to processing trade occupied the main position. And in my mind, actually, for example, if you look at before the financial crisis in 2008, at that time, China's processing trade occupied more than 65%, and the general trade just more than 30%, something like that. But today, that after financial crisis from Chinese side, we realize that we have to promote general trade development. We have to rely on our own brand, relying on innovation and intellectual property. So since 2008, from Chinese side, we started to promote, how to increase China's competitiveness of international trade. And then general trade becomes more and more important. Today, if you look at China's general trade, already occupied our trade volume, estimated about 65%, and processing trade already reduced to 30%, like this type of situation. Meanwhile, we realize that the next step for Chinese side, we still need to have new reform and opening up measures, including reduction of tariffs by our themselves, expand market access for those foreign investors. If you look at recent 2 months in China, foreign fund FDI inflow has very good performance, double-digit growth rate. Meanwhile, China has modified and released the new foreign investment law since 2020. And then that's a very important stimulating instrument for foreign investors today. Also, in China, we promoted the continuous expansion of the free trade experimental zone, and also formulated our, free trade agreement network, especially RCEP recently in process of implementation. Lastly, I like to emphasize on that behind the successful development story for China, actually China's experiences implies for many Belt and Road Initiative partners. The first thing is that we actually, for Chinese side, we successfully grasped the opportunities of the new round of international industrial transfer in the process of globalization and regional integration. Second point, that is China successfully, involved in the global industrial labor division, by reform and opening up and taking advantages of labor force as a beginning. Nowadays, population dividend actually demographic dividend has been disappeared in China. Next step, we have to transfer to innovation-oriented economic model. In China, I think that we have our valuable experiences for some of Belt and Road economies. That is, if you want to be rich, the first priority is to improve the infrastructure. That's why today we have so a lot of this type of projects in BRI partnership partners. The second one, that is, without industrialization, it would be impossible to be rich. That means industrial park and meanwhile combined with urbanization, that would be very important driving force for developing countries. And then for Chinese side, we very appreciate capacity building by education and training courses. In recent years, we provided so lot of this type of training courses for BRI partners. Last point I like to emphasize on that, innovation and creation. That's the only way to avoid the middle income trap for Chinese side and for other, BRI partners. In the future, we have to chase, green BRI, and we have to promote green global value chains and low carbon development. So due to quite limited timing, I just share those information with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Zhang, for this insightful presentation. Also for pointing with the fact that even a successful economy as China is facing challenges in the real world, also with regard to climate change, how to adapt to the measures needed to address climate change. And also, you also hinted at the role of the multilateral trade system and at regional trade agreements such as RCEP and the TPP, which in a way closes the circle of where we started off with the intervention of the ambassador, who also pointed to this area. Now, we have a few minutes for questions and answers. I have one question from the floor. I have also one question myself, so let me post these two questions before. In the meantime, if anybody who is linked per video link has any question if you could please write that in the chat, or if you have any questions here on the floor, please raise your hand. So the question I wanted to ask is, how do you see the opportunities offered by regional economic integration, and in particular the Belt and Road Initiative, also for the Belt and Road partner economies in spurring structural transformation? This is a more general question. We have a more specific question which relates to attempts by advanced to reduce and probably eventually ban the imports of deforestation products from polluting industries, and how you see how this would affect structural transformation. I could imagine that from the countries here, Indonesia would be especially affected. We see the okay, if I may suggest for everybody 2 minutes perhaps, and if we do it in the same sequence as the talk. So if I may ask you, Ambassador Silva, if you would like to start.
Thank you very much for those questions. Maybe on the first aspect that I may like to say something, particularly on this BRI initiative. There had been similar efforts, I think, in many other countries as well. But Sri Lanka's point of view, we have been significantly benefited out of this initiative in terms of building our infrastructure, and I think some of these projects have been funded under the mechanism of export credit. That is the main source of funding mechanism. There, I think when you benefit from such export credit, it's not only the enabling environment that we create to develop the infrastructure, but also we look at the technology transfer. I think that has been one of the most significant aspects in addition to the funding. We look at also how far the country can benefit out of the technology that is being transferred in coupled with that financing mechanism. I think Sri Lanka needs a lot of technology. I think as we noted from the presentation from the Chinese professor and the China's development, I think technology is the key to attaining such development. So innovation, encouraging more innovation and technology transfer. Otherwise, there are no sort of dynamic avenues for us to attract technology transfer into the country. So when we promote export credit, I think we also look at that aspect in strong terms. I think when it comes to such mechanism, the Chinese investment, particularly under BRI, had been quite instrumental in developing such a technology transfer arena. Now, coming to the other area where building the productive capacity in our country. Now, these infrastructure development projects, though they are not directly contributing to enhance the productive capacity, but they are the enablers of building the productive capacity in the country by way of providing logistics and other supporting services to the productive capacity sectors. Export sector has been, I think, tremendously benefited out of it, because then you have the good transport system even within the country and up to the ports. I think we have been able to develop some ports, particularly in the southern area. I think we are trying to attract more investment, particularly to create this particular port and transform it to a more logistic hub. That's where we are trying to, market this particular hub as a way of attracting more foreign investment. So I'll stop here. I think, but there are also a lot of constraints when it comes to attracting foreign investment. because there are other factors as well. So I'll stop here, maybe allow others to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ambassador, would you like to add anything? Tauhid? Yes. Next one.
Yeah. I would like to comment about industrial policy that you mentioned about one opportunity. If we have some environment labeling, it's very important to our country to export this product because the market is so very high. But the challenge is to first, the price between product with labeling with environment is the gap not too high. It's very, very limited. So that's why the cost for this product is more high, but the price of market is the price is not too high. That's why product of ecological not too higher than the conservative product. The second one is I think this is our history that we have big market in China to wood product and other product of our forest. That China receive all the product. They didn't want requirement or then about the eco label, so they take it all. So I think this problem make our product have market by China private institution. Yeah, I think that's common. About the second one about regional economic integration, I think it's very important. Yeah, maybe it seems like not in European Union, but I think in ASEAN we have to between Indonesia, Malaysia, also Singapore. But we have free market. Also, we have decreasing our tax, but the competition is I think still happen between the country to some extent. We have the same market, especially for agricultural product like palm oil, and then also the coal and so on. I think the one challenge is regional economic integration. How we make some contribution between one country with another country, because maybe for some product we have a lot of weakness, but another product we have a lot of strengths for that's why how we make some coordination. I think that's a big challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthäus.
Yes, thank you. For us, Mozambique, talking about the opportunity for regional integration, I think there is a huge opportunity for us as we signed some agreements. We have free market for Europe, or we have also China. From USA we have the AGOA. It's a huge opportunity to export to USA for most of the products. We have also in the region, in the Africa region, we have free trade zone. It's also opportunity for industrialization. In the SADC region, we also have our own free market. Talking about the Belt and Road Initiative, we as Mozambique, we have signed memorandum of understanding with China to develop industrial parks in Mozambique. Now there is a process in Nacala corridor for establishment of industrial park. So I think this is a huge opportunity for us, because as we have a free market for China, we can attract more Chinese investment and other international investment and export to China easily for us. So I can just stop here. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Tamika. If you would please switch off your microphones, otherwise it... Okay.
Yes, thank you. I think with my own experience, what I see, this South-South integration is helping us to retain the much scarce capital within the region. You know, I mean, if you look at the conventional format, you know, we have been now when it comes to Sri Lanka as well. You know, what happens is, I mean, especially for China, its surpluses are invested in West at very low rates, and also countries like Sri Lanka will have to go to the international market and raise money at a substantial rate cost, and then maintain adequate, in order to maintain adequate reserves, then again we'll have to invest this money with a negative carry again in so-called, you know, international sovereign bond, rather investments like T-bills and bonds issued by developed countries. I think with the Chinese, China, of course, I think we need to agree that China has the capacity, and now it comes with the willingness to, you know, park with, rather partner with the neighboring countries. So Sri Lanka has benefited from that immensely. I hope the other countries as well. I heard the Pakistan experience and then Mozambique as well. Now, I think we have been able to source nearly 10 billion, more than 10 billion of, you know, money from China at very low rates. And these are very much related to certain projects, infrastructure, and there again, for a country like ours, now when we have a partner like China, you know, these covenants that are attached to the so-called lending loan contract are very much geared towards, you know, successful completion of the projects within a very, time target, time bound, very within a very certain time frame. That help us immensely. So that project management skills and various other, positive contagion developments. And also, the Sri Lanka has been able to sign a bilateral currency swap with People's Bank of China for 10 billion yuan. And this is another way to, improve the bilateral trade and investments. And when the government of China, the governments of countries join hands, then of course it helps the private sector to follow, because it creates benchmark, and then the private sector always has a benchmark to follow, and then there's always investment protection and then mutual understanding. So that makes the private sector more, directed towards having more integration when it comes to these kind of relationships. I think going forward, China's initiative, AIIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, is going to play a bigger role in this respect. I think that's going to be another plus point, emanating from this BRI initiative. And Sri Lanka, I think now with this, another bonus that we had was the development of the port city project in Colombo. It's a 13 billion project, and China is taking the lead. When China does the building or the construction, then it basically looks for investors as well. I think with that, we hope that Colombo will be an international financial center, very much like the Dubai Financial Center. And we think that the accrued benefits because of this initiative are very much, coming or yielding positive, impact on the country's the economic part, the macroeconomic development. I mean, if we were to attract this kind of benefits, I think, as I mentioned earlier, the underlying cost would be much bigger, and then countries like ours are not in a position to, holding on to these or rather bear these costs, because it comes with some, almost free. I think you name it, financial assistance, technology transformation, and various other, and also the attracting of private sector investors into countries. Otherwise, you'll have to do road shows and, go and convince them. But this initiative is going to create a new world, actually. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Safta.
Well, thank you very much. Well, speaking from the perspective of the regional trade integration, though BRI has not emerged as a template of regional integration as such, but I think the recent history tells us that so many tools of deeper trade integration have been added bilaterally, one would say, between China and each partner. Some of the measures have been highlighted by the Sri Lankan colleague in this regard. Our own experience is that this approach of using multiple tools for deepening the trade integration, trade and investment integration is something different and new, in the sense that, for example, the Chinese colleagues talks about the importance of starting with improving the physical infrastructure of the country. That is one. Then relocation of industries, SEZs, that is another one. In case of Pakistan, for example, we already had China-Pakistan Free Trade Agreement signed a long time back, 2005-06, early harvest, and then, but with more focus on bilateral, on BRI, we 3 years before we revised it, we introduced the phase 2, and already we are talking about the phase 3. But we realize that these traditional FTAs do have limitations and constraints, which, as they're governed by the WTO regulations, so bilateral responsibilities of opening up are sometimes a problem, because given the huge competitive advantage that China has, even the market access concessions given in bilateral FTAs sometimes are not very sufficient. So Chinese are taking care of creating additional demand in their own market for their partner countries. And there, I think the investment by Chinese in agriculture in Pakistan, for example, in bringing export-oriented Chinese companies to Pakistan and then exporting back to China, and then to create better environment for the exports from Pakistan to China in terms of addressing technical barriers to trade. So due care is being given to that also. And last but not the least, the financing. Financing is getting due coverage in China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. We have huge currency swap agreements already with China. But now due attention is being given to the integration of capital markets between the two countries. So in the traditional shallow integration, trade integration agreements, it's more about market access and merchandise. But now with the arrival of services and due importance being given to the services sector, we strongly hope that we would achieve a better quality, deeper trade integration, mutually beneficial to both the countries in the years to come, as a cumulative result of all those investments and proactive measures and capacity development. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Jianping?
Yeah, I just following the speech from Pakistan. Actually, my understanding is that the Belt and Road Initiative can have two different approaches. The first one is institutional cooperations. We hope that we can have free trade agreements.
I think we lost him.
We lost the line. Yeah, it's just
Investment agreements or instruments
he's back. You're
to
back now, I believe.
be
but-
very high efficiency or remote web development. Other also, depend on the, non-institutional operations. That means another governments maybe have no free trade agreement.
sorry,
We
are
have
having
no
problems
investment.
with the connection.
However, we can promote creation by fields, project by project. So I hope that all of that on behalf of a very comprehensive cooperation platform.
I'm sorry, Jianping, we are having problems with the
International
connection
in the field
because we are
be
running out of time.
involved in, and there we can promote our development with high efficiency. In this regard, I think that
Yeah. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Xi Jinping, we can't hear you. Yeah, unfortunately, we are having this problem right at the very end. But let me close the meeting here. Let me thank you all for this very interesting interventions. I think it has, at least for me, it has made appetite for more. And also this afternoon, there'll be the fourth session at 2 o'clock on the digital economy. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. No, I have written about it, but I